can see you, Amanda.
How random.
Oh, and I can see Will as well.
Maybe not a presenter. That's possibly why.
Yeah, no.
Beautiful.
That's for sure.
All right. We should have a room full of people now. Q&A on. Hello, how are you all? Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in a minute. We'll just wait for a few more people to come in, but I just thought I'd introduce myself. My name's Amanda Burchmann from JAB Agri Solutions. Late last year, I did some training with Will around the MSA grading, and I found it very interesting and couldn't wait to come home and really use it in my own practices. But I also spoke to a lot of people since then and noticed that a lot of other people are in the same predicament as me and would love to understand MSA grading more. Matt and I work together and we're really working on best opportunities for our finance and our end market. So understanding our data is really important. So that's why we invited Will along. He's the expert in this area to give a little presentation and to get you started and to ask any questions. I'll throw it over to Matt in a moment, but I just want to let everyone know that we will be recording this meeting and I will send it out afterwards within the next few days so you can watch it again if you can't, or for those that were unable to make it tonight. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. My name's Matt Brown and I have my own consultancy business and I work with Amanda doing some very exciting things. We also have a cattle business as well. So I was very excited when Will was going to do this talk because it's so important that we understand what this means for the product that we sell. And in our own cattle business, it's all driven by data. So I was really excited that Will was coming along to talk to us tonight. When do you want to kick off, Amanda?
Look, I've still got a couple of drips and drabs coming in, but Will, maybe if you just introduce yourself to start off with, and then after that we might get the presentation started.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda and Matt. So as you know, my name's Will Atkinson. I work in the Meat Standards Australia team. So what I do with that team is largely around business development, education, and working with both producers and processors on helping them understand and get the most out of the program. So that could be everything from analysing data all the way through to interpreting that to how you work on farm. And then in the processing sector, it's more about then how do you actually utilise the product that's on hand and how they understand the quality and can differentiate that product into their brand structures. So I work across beef and lamb. And we've got some exciting developments in the lamb space, which I'll briefly touch on, but the main focus of this is on the MSA beef system and what's available to you all as producers.
Yeah, I think that the thing is, Will, is that we really need to concentrate on that as livestock producers to ensure that our quality, the product is quality, because without and we all get very passionate about the animals that we breed, but I mean, if we don't have that quality at the end, it doesn't matter whether we breed, a wildebeest or a zebra. It's what people want to eat.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I've kind of captured it around sort of called generating supply chain value. So we'll cover across a number of areas that look at how do you piece those puzzles together with, I guess, the final market in mind. And I'll throw some sort of rhetorical questions at you all to sort of help think about how you apply it on farm and what you guys might do on a day-to-day basis.
So I think if people have questions, raise your hand. Don't be afraid to use the chat. We love a good chat, and Amanda and I will be monitoring that, and we can ask Will questions on your behalf from the chat as well. Obviously, with this amount of people on, we don't want everyone trying to talk at once because we won't hear a thing. So if you want to raise your hand if you want to ask a question, put it into chat. And yeah, you reckon we're ready to kick off, Amanda?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Nice. got the slide up there okay?
Perfect.
Perfect. So I'm just going to move some. Right. So what I'm going to cover off on today is just give you a bit of a quick overview of the red meat industry structure and then MLA's remit. It's important to understand how we fit into the broader industry. And then I'll go into, again, high level, the fundamentals of MSA, where it's come from, what it is. And from there, what we'll go into is looking at how do you set yourself up to be able to get carcass data, how do you supply cattle, some of the standards and recommendations and the requirements behind the program as a producer. And then we'll delve into more around the data side, what impacts quality, how do you make sense of what's measured, and how you actually use that data to pull levers on farm to make change. The bit about the thought prompts come into the target market, like getting you to think about what your actual target is rather than a blanket approach to your production system. And then once you've got the data, you understand your market, well, actually using the data then as benchmarking and set yourself up then to continue utilizing that going forward. I've put questions at the end there, but by all means, if you need a bit of clarification within, I'm happy to take questions as we go. I do, however, have a bit of content here, some of which I'll skim over, some things I'll spend a bit more time on. So this is the red meat industry structure. What we have here is basically the Red Meat Advisory Council at the top. You've got then your peak industry bodies along underneath that. So Cattle Australia being the grass-fed producers, Alpha being Australian lot feeders. You've got the meat industry, sheep, goat, and then the live export. Underneath that is your service providers. That's where MLA sits. So the above group focuses on policy and advocacy. We focus on providing a service to industry, research, development. So focused on R&D, obviously adoption. So my role is the adoption of MSA or the adoption of carcass value and the carcass value science. And then obviously we have marketing involved in MLA as well. So you might be familiar with the lamb ads and some of the Aussie Beef the Greatest and some of those programs. That's part of the marketing. But the focus on MLA is for the producer. So we want to actually work towards, and we do work towards, ensuring producer profitability, sustainability, and then of course global competitive. We work in market, quite detailed in market as well, and spend a lot of time there as an organisation. Some quick what we do and don't do. So obviously research, development, adoption, as I said, marketing. We have the National Vendor Deck program, the LPA, so Livestock Production Assurance Scheme, and obviously NLIS. That fits in under Integrity Systems Company, which is a subsidiary of MLA. Obviously, we do work with the peak industry bodies. That's providing the research to them. We don't actually work on any policy. And then, of course, we partner with some of the other RDCs, particularly in the meat industry, but also more recently with GRDC in the grains industry. We've got a partnership with them looking at how do we provide, I guess, better support to the industry as a broader group. A lot of market insights, market information support, and then we do a lot of stakeholder engagement. What we don't do is policy and political. We don't focus on the politics side of things. We leave that up to the peak industry bodies, and we work in providing research for the producers, not being told to work on something through the state organisations or the political parties. So the main part about it, we also don't influence pricing or labour and processing capacity. They're all commercial-based decisions that we don't have influence over. We, of course, report on pricing. We report on the sale yard and things like some of the retail prices. We do some, I guess, surveys around that, but we don't forecast or set those pricing. So just a quick rundown of MLA. I'm happy to go into more detail about the broader stuff at a later date, or if you want to get in contact afterwards. But what we're here for. So MSA, so go into the detail here about MSA across the whole program, but this first bit will just touch on high level what it is. It's a Australian beef and sheep meat grading program. which predicts eating quality based on the consumer experience of tenderness, juiciness, flavour, and overall liking. So first up, we've got the consumer in our mind, and that's where a lot of what you do on farm has to keep that in mind, what you market, because that's going to a consumer. And they experience this across their product and across the product that we supply to them. So it's important to have them in mind. So we work heavily in eating quality, but outside of that, we also focus across the whole supply chain, and not just specific to what's the eating experience, but also specific to how does the productivity on farm influence the growth of the animal, or some of the outcomes like animal health side of things. Then into the processing, what actually efficiencies can you make in the processor based on the data that we have access to? The grading gets done there, the influence on quality at the processor happens there, even things like indicators around yield or cut utilization. And then into the packaging, how the product's aged, packaged, whether it's modified atmosphere packaging or whether it's the vacuum seal, and of course to the consumer, and then in more around the cooking method more specifically. So MSA actually has standards and recommendations across all this, but we also work from an education point of view across the whole supply chain to help ensure that the product is basically maintained quality all the way through. We also do a lot of R&D. So we have a R&D group within the MSA program. So obviously on the adoption of the R&D side, so all of this research that we do, we then look at how that has an impact on quality. So using the top left example there is a railway system. We have a large railway system, particularly in Queensland. And so in that research, we're looking at what the impact is putting the cattle on the railway in the carriages versus trucking them, which that report is actually so close, so close. It's been a long time coming, but it's a good one. And then just some other areas like new technology, new trait development. What do we not know now about quality? We're always exploring and exploring that. And then how do you actually then relate that back to on farm? And so then the adoption side comes into working across the whole supply chain. So typical education, like what we're doing today, deep dives into the data, small working groups, as you can see there in the bottom group there, where we're solving or looking at solving a specific challenge or working with producers on specific areas, and then international as well. So that right-hand side picture there is working in Japan actually on how do they get the most out of the product, some cut utilization stuff in that there. So for MSA program, over 2023 to 25, we do every 2 years, we do a big dump of reporting. And basically, we will change that now to actually more of a yearly as we develop a program that we can have access to for national benchmarking. But this currently is our benchmarking program. So what this looks like is just give you a quick snapshot of what's involved in MSA. So there's 46,000 producers that are registered beef specific. We had 8 million head of cattle graded over those last 2 years, obviously about 4 million a year. The average index has increased year on year in the last few years. Actually, it was 58.3 last year. It's 58, or last 2 years, it's 58.5 now. But I guess the key thing probably for you all, not only index is a good average target to look for, but the $735 million return to farm gate. And so how you get that is based on the premium that is offered for producing an MSA eligible animal. But also some processors will actually offer a premium then above that if you achieve a higher index. And we work quite closely with the processors, those 41 processors, to actually help them get the most out of the product and help them understand how they can pass that value down. That's high level about the program at a glance. What I'm going to do now is go into the fundamentals of actually supplying the cattle. How do you become registered? What are the on-farm requirements around supplying MSA cattle? And then sort of some key things to think about as well. So it's relatively straightforward. Of course, you have to be registered as an MSA producer, and I've got the link for that right at the end. And then if you've already been consigning cattle, If you're not MSA, you'll be fully aware of the national vendor deck. MSA has a vendor deck that can also be combined with that as part of the electronic one. Key thing here, though, for a standard and a requirement of the program is those cattle that you consign to the processor or through the sale yard to the processor must be on the property for 30 days before dispatch. And that's largely to do with that social hierarchy and how those animals as a behaviour work together and, well, it's work together or live together for those 30 days. And we've worked out that 30 days is a nice period where they can actually work out who's who in the zoo and also put on weight in that time. Consignments must be processed within 48 hours of leaving the property, both direct consignment and through a sale yard. There are a couple of key things in here around spelling and whatnot as well. So giving a period of rest if you're on a longer haul, longer haul consignment. But if you want to know more about that, we can actually provide you with the detailed standards around what that is. And then two sort of key areas there, as you'd kind of expect. So entire males or animals displaying those secondary characteristics are not eligible. So basically heifers, cows and steers are eligible, but bulls are not. And then of course, because it doesn't meet the fit to load guide, sick or injured cattle are not eligible. And that obviously, as I said, doesn't suit the fit to load guide anyway. So you would probably not do that in the first instance regardless. The next one is just some recommendations. So those previous ones were requirements for the program. These recommendations are largely around ensuring the cattle and the product is basically as optimum in quality. Basically, you keep them as one mob for a minimum of 14 days. You don't want to mix them within that period because then they have the problem with the working out who's who in the zoo and working out the behaviour side of things. And then just that extra handling of the animals 14 days within 14 days also reduces their puts a bit of stress but reduces their energy levels. So obviously you want to apply best handling practices and minimize stress of the animal, which I'll cover a bit more as to what that actually impacts in the data and the product. And then leading up to processing, you ideally need them to be on a growth pathway. So they're on a ration or grazing that allows at least 0.8 kilograms per day growth. And then we say a minimum of that or ideally of that. But if I was running a farm myself, I'd be targeting something higher if I was really chasing a market, a processor market there. And that 30 days prior also helps with that. So it gives you time to grow that animal out. Briefly mentioned the vendor declarations before. This is just what the MSA one looks like for those that are not familiar with it. So this is in addition to the national vendor deck. So you can get those through.
The MSA on it now. You would have seen that.
Sorry, is that a question? Sorry. No, I'll keep going. You can access through this if you log into your MSA account or just calling our MSA inquiries to purchase them. Otherwise, there's an electronic version online, which I'll quickly show a snippet of in a second. So you can access those along with all the other vendor deck information. But in terms of your reporting, keeping those vendor decks on farm the same as the national vendor decks, you want to have a copy of those for any auditing or reporting through Livestock Production Assurance Scheme. And then the electronic vendor decks, if you log in through MyMLA, you can access the ENVDs. These give you access to not just the national vendor deck, but you can also access those other, declarations, MSA being one of them, but also if you're a feedlotter, the NFAS, and then if there's a health declaration that's required as well. This just allows you to have those all in one place rather than having multiple and a bit of duplication. And then the key one there to register, it's pretty straightforward. You do need a MyMLA account. Probably most of you would have one of those, so you can go through MyMLA to register. I've got a link right at the end, a sort of tab of resources for you that has the link to that. There is some online training, and so that'll take you to the online training as you go through that process. So what that looks like is just key things around what impacts quality on farm, both beef and sheep meat. Depending on what you're producing, you can do both or one or the other. But that enables you to sort of get the fundamentals of producing for MSA eligibility and grading. It'll work you through the steps of linking the accounts to MyMLA, but MyMLA is the core point where all MLA tools and resources, you have access to all those tools and resources if you've got that account. So that's briefly about how to become registered and what's required in the program as a producer for producing cattle for MSA grading. What I'm going to get into now is a little bit of the science, a bit about each of the key traits and why they're important and why we measure them. So if there are some questions out of this, if I do delve in a bit too deeply and you need some clarification, please pop something in the chat and feel free to interrupt me and I can clarify something. But getting right into it, there are multiple inputs that have an impact on quality. Marbling is definitely one of them, but it's not just marbling. We have 14 different traits that we measure, which have an impact on quality. Some of these are influenced by the producer, which is what I'm going to cover on now. Some of the things are not influenced by you, aka the cooking method, right? And aging that cut of meat beyond when it's packaged beyond the processor. But they all still have an impact, and we take that into account with the grading at how the processor uses it, not how it influences your outcome and your data. So what I'm going to cover now is into some of these key traits. So pH being probably the most important one, and it's one of the two in or out compliance-based measures that we take. So it's related to the amount of energy or glycogen, because I'll touch on what glycogen is that the animal has. And that glycogen enables the pH to go from about a 7, so neutral pH, down below 6, and then below that 5.71. So we want pH below that because if we have pH above that, there are some significant consumer risks that can come about that. And that's things like reduced shelf life, because higher pH, a more neutral pH, means a better environment for bacteria to grow. There's big cooking inconsistencies. You can see visually on the right-hand side there's some color differences as well. And then when it comes to the actual eating experience, it can be tough. It's got no juice in it. It's really dry and not a good time for our consumer. And so it's a risk to our consumers. And so it's why I think it's important and that we measure that trait and we report on it in terms of MSA compliance. And so why that's important from an animal point of view is the glycogen is actually the amount of energy that's in the animal, in their muscles. And nutrition enables good glycogen, good energy, but stressing the animal out reduces that. So obviously low stress handling and how those animals have been moved around or even access to nutrition leading into slaughter particularly. So that last 30 days, that's sort of part of that. And then the recommendation about no handling of the animal in 14 days, except for obviously the consignment period, that optimizes the energy levels. And then amount of glycogen then reduces the pH. So glycogen gets turned into lactic acid, and the acid is what reduces the pH down. So if you don't have enough glycogen, the pH is going to stay high. The animal doesn't have enough energy, the pH is going to stay high. So how do we maximize it? Well, nutrition is the only point where energy is given to the animal. So maximizing nutrition or optimizing nutrition for the animal, particularly in that last 30 days, is essential to ensure a good quality as well as reducing pH. If you mix or draft the animal, that reduces the level of glycogen, so less energy available. If there's some underlying animal health issues that haven't been picked up. That'll have an impact on their energy levels. Heifers in estrus. That heifers in estrus not only impacts themselves, it also impacts the others around them because there's a bit of mounting and that going on. So there's just a bit of extra movement and stress. Even a weather event. The first cold snap on the downs, we can see an impact in the grading data in some of the cattle, particularly some of your northern breed cattle that are more attuned to a warmer temperature. That first frost they get on the downs can be a bit of an impact to them. But even big storms and stuff, you'll see potential impacts to their stress as well. Excessive handling we touched on, and then of course movement in terms of loading, unloading, and excessive loading and unloading. If you think about it for yourself, if it stresses the animal out, it impacts the glycogen. Anything that might stress you out and you feel depleted from energy, it's kind of the same thing. If you just put anything in your mind as yourself, that enables you to think about how it might impact the animal. Moving on to the next couple of traits. So I'll cover off on MSA marbling. Key thing you can see there that Osmeat and MSA both have a marble score. Both of them are measured on the same scale, as you can see there, but we've got 0 to 9 with Osmeat, and then 100 to 1190 technically with MSA. Of course, marbling increases the flavour and juiciness of meat, but in the MSA marbling, in what we do is we account for both amount and the distribution within that cut. So during the grading process, we don't just look at how much marbling's there, we look at how fine and how well distributed it is. Whereas Osmeat marbling, we just look at the amount. So that's the nuance difference, and that's why we have 100 and 10-point increments on that. Marbling is an important factor that influences quality. However, it actually only accounts for 15% of the variation of quality across the whole carcass. So that's why it's important to look at other traits. And that's why I started with the marbling's important, but it's not the only thing. And it's definitely important from a market point of view. There are specs out there to say that brands require a specific marble score, but it's one of the key parts that influences quality. From an animal production point of view, it's the last fat in the growth cycle to be deposited. And it's also a slightly different fat composition to your external rib fat. And so it's actually a quick fat store for the animal. So if that animal needs energy and needs to use quick energy, it will deplete marbling. So there's another point to low stress handling and another point to ensuring that animal has basically the best life going throughout to ensure that they maximize those traits. Next key trait is ossification. So ossification is the measurement of cartilage in the spine turning to bone. What you can see on the right-hand side there is low ossification to sort of not even a mid-range, just a few steps higher. But you can see the change in the gaps of white versus then the closing of the bone there. That's what we measure during grading. We visually look at that and how much of that spine has turned to bone. And that gives us an indication of physiological maturity of the animal and has a direct impact on the tenderness. So higher ossification, there's basically larger connective cross links within the muscle, and so they're tighter. Lower ossification, they're a bit looser and relaxed. And we've found that consumer point of view has a direct impact. It's a physiological age as opposed to dentition, which is chronological. If that animal, for example, is born in a drought and has underlying levels of nutrition stress throughout most of their life, they'll have a higher ossification than another animal their same age that then has had a better life and a better nutrition and stress-free. So it's important to note that anything you do on farm that might have an influence on the animal stress-wise or health or even access to nutrition and weather events can have an impact on ossification, and it cannot be reversed. So it's a whole of life indication for us on that animal stress, really. Can be influenced by maturity measures in genetics. So if you've got good 400-day growth rates on your genetics, you can get that animal to market spec earlier and younger. They mature younger, so they're less likely to get the stressor events, and it largely ensures that ossification can stay a bit lower. Next key traits are hump height and carcass weight. They work in conjunction with each other. So we measure hump height in conjunction with carcass weight as the main indicator of quality between those two traits. So what that gives us is an indication of the impact of quality based on how big the hump is realistically, and then how in proportion it is to the carcass weight. The key thing about hump height is it's important to think about the production system first, not just go, oh, well, I can't have humpy cattle because it might have an impact. You can balance out the impact that it has on quality, but it's important to make sure that the animals are better suited to the environment, because they'll have a better chance of actually growing for that environment than if they're not suited to that environment. So how it works is basically we have two steers here as an example. The one on the left has the same hump height as the one on the right, but the one on the left, the steer A, has a slightly lower, actually significantly lower carcass weight. That will have a larger impact on quality because of that ratio. Whereas steer B, they're more in proportion with each other. The hump height and the carcass weight are more in proportion. So the impact of hump height is going to be less. So just understanding that in itself, so finishing the animal can actually have a positive influence on the outcome. But also that's just one trait. So talking about marbling and ossification, those traits also have an impact, and they enable you to balance out the impact that this trait has. Quick touch on HGPs, if there's any feedlotters in the room or online. Obviously have a positive impact on weight gain and feed conversions, and really are an amazing tool that enables us to get cattle to market spec earlier. However, it does have an impact on quality because we are basically pushing the animals to grow. It's focused on the growth, and then that has a negative impact on the potential eating quality. It also has a bit of a knock-on impact to things like marbling and ossification, because the body's putting effort into that growing at an accelerated rate. The last key one I'm going to touch on that has an influence on quality is fat coverage. We have a minimum 3 mils of rib fat. That's another compliance-based measure. To be honest, it's relatively easy to get 3 mils of rib fat. So it's just a matter of making sure you've got a bit of finishing in that animal. Obviously, if the time of the year and we're in a drought, there can be some challenges around that. But the reason we have that is actually it protects and insulates the cuts. Not only it ensures that the animal has been finished, but it actually has then a flow-on effect, because then if those cuts are exposed, they get cold shortened, which basically results in them being dry and tough. And so they're not great to eat. And it's a good one for then the processors to also have understanding of how rib fat influences the insulation, because when they're chilling the carcasses, how they manage their chilling system to enable that carcass not to cold shorten, enable that carcass to actually have the best optimum path to being good quality. So that's a bit of an indicator for them. So how do we make sense of all that information? On your feedback sheets, you will receive the traits and what they are, as I just discussed, what each each one actually is measured in, and then it all leads to the index. So the MSA index is the benchmarking tool that gives you an overall impact of quality, or overall quality of the carcass. And it's actually the weighted average of those cuts within the carcass and the eating quality of the cuts based on what the consumers have told us about the product, and then related to what those carcass traits, how those carcass traits impact the index or impact quality. So it's kind of like a way for you to look and go, well, what's my overall quality? As I said, the average was 58.5. So if you were looking at your data and you saw this carcass as a 57.6, you might think, okay, what do I do? What do I need to do to improve? And so then you look at the carcass traits and you go, well, we want to know what actually impacts the index and what carcass traits I should focus on. So what we have here is a bit of an indication of the impact those individual traits have on the MSA index and largely eating quality. First and foremost, the group up the top there are a combination of management and pathway decisions. So obviously using HGPs or putting them through a sale yard, which I didn't discuss in detail, but happy to cover that if anyone wants to have a brief conversation about that. The next ones are all the key traits that have an influence on quality, but they are a combination of genetics, the environment that animal's in, the management of the animal and how they're handled, and then of course the nutrition that they receive all has an influence on those traits. So it's good to sort of think about how do they work in conjunction with each other and how do you actually pull the levers on farm to make a difference. Quick few traits that don't have a direct influence on quality, but we actually measure. So the eye muscle area gives us an indication of yield, and then meat color and fat color are currently traits that are measured and are, I guess, a specification for some brands. So that's beef, and that's largely all the impacts and how things influence quality and on farm. There's a lot of information there. I appreciate that. But that's sort of how we measure those traits and why we measure them and the importance behind them. I'm going to briefly touch on the sheep model, and then we'll get into sort of the benchmarking, the target market, a bit more about how you actually make sense of the data. And just check if there's any questions before I jump into this. Cool. Sheep meat model, largely the same as the beef, just a little bit dialed back. Not as many traits, but still a number of traits that we know have an influence on quality. So this is relatively new and it requires technology. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but you can see the traits on the left-hand side. Some of those, the producer influences, some of them, the processor influences, the same as the beef in that regard. But it needs technology, particularly to measure intramuscular fat or IMF. So you might be aware of IMF percentage that's used as an estimated breeding value. We measure the IMF percentage in lambs, and that enables us to actually have an indication of quality. These are some of the technology that's out there currently. If you'd like to know more, we've got some resources that we can point you towards, or even we can just have a bit of a conversation about it and you can reach out. So now into how do you actually make sense of some of this information and utilize it on farm? So what I'm first going to do is just throw some questions at you to think about. They're rhetorical. I'm not expecting anyone to answer. Feel free if you want to put something in the chat about what your market is or whatnot to get any conversation going. But the idea behind this is just to help you think about how you might go about using this information in your production system. So first and foremost, align yourself to a breeding objective. So if you're a breeding system, or even if you're a finishing system, what are the breeders doing? What are you actually targeting for the final outcome? Are you buying the right animals that fit that? So in terms of breeding, there's programs and tools available within MLA that can help with that. So the bred well, fed well, the breed plan that's there. We have a genetics program that can help with that, but there's a lot of different tools available within MLA. But the key thing there is don't chase single traits or extremes. So this is just a quick example of IMF versus yield. So IMF being that intramuscular fat or marbling, and then yield, of course, being the amount of meat available. These two traits are inversely related to each other. So if you purely focus on IMF, you'll then likely to have less yield. If you purely focus on yield, you'll likely have less IMF, which then has an impact on quality. But you can see this quadrant of animals that actually do both. You've got positives on IMF and you've got positives on yield. So identifying or trying to identify those animals and selecting for that can help balance it out rather than just one or the other, because you can produce animals that do both. It's just finding that balance between the two. If you're trading stock, have a think about what you actually know about the livestock. where they come from. Can you get more information out of the breeder, or can you get better carcass feedback or feedback from the processor or even the feedlotter ask about performance in the feedlot? So just think about what you can actually gather to help make decisions as a trader. Realize that you've only got sort of a limited time with that animal and ability to influence. So selecting the right animals can have a massive influence on that. To help prompt that, this is a really quick exercise. I'm not going to go in detail here, but I'm just going to highlight 3 key traits and differences between a domestic market and an export market spec animal. So when you think about domestic market, they're going to have a lighter carcass weight. They're probably going to have lower marbling. And because they're lighter, they're typically also younger. They're probably going to have lower ossification and have gotten to market spec earlier. Export, heavier, longer time on feed. So they're actually a slightly older animal. They might have been around for longer, so then they've got higher ossification. And then, of course, if you're chasing like a higher marbled program or looking for a market spec chasing a marbling, there's going to be increased marbling in that as well. And a lot of export brands do have market specs in them. If you look at the MSA index, they're basically the same. And that's because those traits don't just work as individuals, they work together. And so what your market is important when it comes to setting up your production system and what you're targeting. But they both can equal good quality. So just thinking about where you're targeting and do you need to put the input in to get them to that export spec if you're actually not chasing an export spec, and just trying to optimize what you do in that sense. And to help do that, you need to understand the market requirements. So obviously MSA has specifications around compliance to pH and rib fat. There might be MSA index, or you might have seen a boning group, which is largely a brand structure that's on the grid or required by the processor. And then there's company specifications. They might be specs on carcass weight and pH fat, and of course, meat color, fat color. So understanding those, getting information out of your buyers or out of your agents to really kind of hone in what that looks like. And then establishing relationships actually then helps you understand the market and what's going on. This and what Amanda and Matt are doing is a perfect example of that. Being involved in programs that gives you a bit of an understanding of actually what's going on can really help with that. So the last little bit is then bringing all of that information that we've just spoken about into how do we actually use that data. And now that you've set your target market, you understand how the traits influence on farm. It's now about, well, let's set up some benchmarking and go, let's look at where we're at now and how do we focus on improving. So first and foremost, in a finishing system, you'll have access to the carcass data based on MSA data, as well as if they're reporting it, animal disease and defect, so offal defect. Finishers currently can have access to that in My MSA. My Feedback is a new system that's available, and all of the carcass feedback is available in My Feedback and accessible through the MLA platforms. And I'll cover off on what that is and how that works. And as sort of what I mentioned a bit about the trading side, if you're a breeder background, what access information do you have? Can you talk to the feedlot? Some feedlots, particularly if it's directly aligned with a processor, may actually be willing to share some information on performance with you. It's just worth having a phone conversation with them about it. And if you're a breeder, My Feedback, you'll have access to data through My Feedback because it links back to the original pick on the NLIS ear tag. And that data will just show you the state that animal was processed in. It won't tell you what abattoir that animal has gone to, but you'll have access to that data at least and the performance of that animal.
Will, can I just butt in there for 5 seconds? Sorry. We use Black Box, and they work with the feedlotters. So we sell the majority of our cattle as feeders. Yeah. But we get the feedback data back from them, and we put it into Black Box. But Black Box will actually work with a number of different feedlotters to get that data back. And it's not only carcass data, it's performance data, it's how well the cattle are growing, how many, if they've been bushed or whatever. Absolutely brilliant. Can't talk highly enough about it. But you also upload all your feedback sheets into it, and it'll do an analysis of what your average MSA is and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, they're valuable,
Bill-
those tools. Yeah.
Bill, would you mind addressing Terry's comment in the chat? Would you like me to read it out, or can you see that?
Can you please read it out?
Of course.
The screens don't have it.
Yes, no, that's okay. What become of the livestock data link trial of 2014? For those that grow weaners but don't have enough land to finish cattle to process it was a good indicator of how our cattle are going.
So my feedback is the new version of Livestock Data Link. And we're constantly upgrading it. So it's quite new. And we've taken what LDL was doing and enhanced it. And we're currently going through a process at the moment of providing, I guess, version 2 of my feedback, which is not released just yet, but will be soon. That'll have more, I guess, analytics and data and available to you, which is where the animal health stuff has come from. So Livestock Data Link, a key part of that was some of the animal health information. We've taken that on board as part of my feedback. So Livestock Data Link doesn't exist anymore.
Thanks, Will.
Next one. No worries. As I've sort of said a few times, everything's accessed through my MLA. So I've highlighted my feedback there, but you can actually see the quick access for me there. You can see MSA, National Livestock Identification Scheme, sheep genetics, ENVD. So anything that you use and other services that are available, my MLA is the go-to place for that. But in terms of my feedback, what is my feedback? All carcass data in one place. So all your analysis information, MSA, Animal Health Australia, so the health data, and then the National Livestock Reporting Scheme. So we have some benchmarking information in there comparing back to a national or state or region. And it's available for the producers, processors, and then if the non-packer exporters or a brand owner, they also have their own access to it. Each has a slightly nuanced version, but largely all the data and information is the same. But from a producer point of view, it just gives you access to all that information in one place. It gives you easy to understand analytics. You can look at every individual consignment. You can go into more detail, and you can benchmark to a national state. At a producer level, you can also benchmark to a region. Just gives you that information all in one place. Then it obviously has information about disease and defect data that's being collected if it's the processors collecting it to the standard, which is something we're working with them on. That takes time. And then you actually then have a resource in the feedback portal, or the solutions to feedback portal too, which covers every little bit of feedback that you can gather. It goes into detail about what that is and why that exists, what it means to you, what it could mean to you, sorry, and how to manage it. I'm just going to kind of briefly skip through a bit about like where you can kind of navigate and find stuff. I'm not going to go into detail. It's just to give you a bit of an idea of what's in there before we get into a little bit about how you actually use the data. So all your consignments will be in there. You can filter for date ranges. You can specific processors or picks if you've got multiple picks or consigned to multiple processors. If you're a breeder, it'll just be a state-based data. So the consignment will only be limited to where those cattle have gone. Gives you a quick overview of that number of head for those consignments. You can see national, state, or regional benchmarking available to you on some of those key traits. Then it goes into a bit more detailed of your kill dates. So then you've actually got those different dates there. You can go in and actually see a quick overview of those key traits. You can see there that there's index, there's a yield-based trait there, and then there's also a number of cattle that have had defects or diseases being measured. And as you delve in a bit further, you then get into that specific kill date. You go into what's the data telling us as an overview there, again, comparing to a benchmark, and then into the individual carcasses. So you will get a clean carcass feedback sheet from the processor, and in the MyMSA system, we will eventually have a more detailed carcass feedback sheet as an individual consignment in my feedback. At the moment, you've just got this higher level, but you can go into more detail about the carcasses in terms of the analytics capability. But you'll always receive a feedback sheet. And if you've consigned MSA cattle, if you're not receiving one, reach out to us, because you should have access to that data. And so we need to make sure you've got access to it. So we have 2 key reporting in my feedback. We've got an MSA summary, then we've got an animal health, disease and defect one. The disease and defect is pretty high level. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but here I'm just going to give you a bit of a snippet of how you might actually use some of that data we spoke about, and understanding now what those traits impact quality on farm. How do you actually have an influence on that using this data? MSA summary report gives you higher level, gives you the compliance, carcass traits, the minimum, maximum, the average, comparing to a benchmark. Just a bit of info there for you, and you can delve into a bit more detail. What's valuable is when you start doing that, delving into a bit of detail. You go, okay, well, look, we've captured a 2-year period here or 3-year period here, and we've compared it to a benchmark. I think it was maybe national. I can't remember this data, but you can see the fluctuation in the MSA index. So remember, MSA index is the combination of all the eating quality of those traits, eating quality of those cuts influenced by those traits. And so if you think about what influences those traits, you go, look, well, what's happening here? We can see there's been a dip in index there and a dip in index there, both roughly about the same time of the year. It could be seasonal, but then previous year, it's actually been okay. So what's happened here? Well, you look at the next trait. You start going, okay, went from index. We want to know what's happened to our index. We go into one trait. We'll start with marbling. You can see again that in that same time frame, that 24 August and 25 July and June, your marbling's down, your index is down, your marbling's down. It's okay, well, what happened there that might have had an influence on marbling? Was I able to give them enough nutrition to actually express that marbling? Have we just had a pretty dry winter and we don't have a great start to the spring there? Then same deal with carcass weight. So I'm just looking at 2 traits here, but you could actually look into ossification, for example, as well on top of this, or and then you look at them as a combined group there. Yes, the carcass weight drops a little bit further beyond August, but just for this instance, you can see that their carcass weight is also lower. And so same in June and July. So all of a sudden, there's a number of different things that are actually having an impact. And so you can start looking at, well, what are those things that actually influence those traits, and how do I use that information, and what changes do I have to make on farm? To me, this could be a finishing side of things, given it's not consistent enough that it might be a genetic-based thing, because they do have the genetics to express marbling, as we saw before, and they do have the genetics to put on weight. So I go to the finishing period, what's happening in that period. And then if there's some operational changes, do you handle them that bit more? Is there an extra draft that goes on? Do they get mixed up a little bit out, and they sort of spend less time actually eating and more time trying to work out what's going on around them? It's just a bit of an idea of how you might use that information available to you. There is a lot more in it. And to be honest, you can spend a whole session just on my feedback and the carcass feedback, but I hope that's given you a bit of an indication of how you might be able to use that to think about what's going on farm, and then how that's actually expressed in the traits. Quick high level from the animal disease and defect. We are able to get information on how many cattle were healthy, so to speak, or how many then had the conditions. So some of these conditions don't necessarily mean that that animal has been sick leading into slaughter. These are measured in the offal. So whether it's like the liver or the heart, for example, or even the kidneys in terms of cysts and things like that, some of those, particularly pneumonia and liver fluke, might have happened prior and might not actually be sick or be prevalent there and then when that animal has gone through processing, but it still can have scarring or can have cysts form because of that, which then means that that offal is not fit for human consumption and not fit to be used. So we report on that to help us understand, well, what happened along the supply chain, and is it the most recent finisher that has had an influence on that, or can we trace that back further and identify where that, where the impact to that animal's had? Big part of reporting on this is also understanding that there might have actually been a dip in production of that animal because of these traits. And so being able to identify individuals with this data also allows us to look at, well, what paddock did I have them in? Is there a higher fluke load in that paddock? Something like that, just kind of think a bit more about the production system. But to help make sense of all that, we have the solutions to feedback. And this gives you an opportunity to really get into the detail around some of these, in this case, diseases, but we have them also for the traits and the MSA grading as well. Gives you just sort of something to kind of understand a bit more what's going on. But of course, you should definitely go and talk to either your animal health rep or your vet if there's a higher prevalence and you're experiencing within your production system. And the last little snippet about my feedback is if you do have an advisor, a vet or health professionals you're working with, you can actually share access to your My Feedback account by providing them with basically access and a user role. So you have the ability to give that to them. They don't just get access to it. So it's obviously based on your permission, giving them access. But if you're working quite closely with an advisor and they're also interested, or with an agent, and the agent's also interested in looking at the carcass data to help you make better decisions on farm, we can give them access to that with your permission. And that's basically it for me. There's a few key resources there for you to access. You can tell I was clicking on those earlier today, but they'll be available to you. I can send through a PDF version of these slides, so you have access to these links as well. But key links there, some of the producer registration, all the feedback information, as well as some of the training. So if you want to do some of the producer training, if you're already an MSA producer, but you want to have a look at doing some more, there's a bit in that. And then some key resources. The Beef Tips and Tools is our go-to manual for basically anything MSA beef. Goes through all the traits in more detail, how that influenced the cuts, what on farm, and some of those key information. And then annual outcomes, obviously we do annually. It's just a bit of a snippet of performance of MSA cattle around the country. And then if you're interested in the sheep meat program, there's a fact sheet there for you to access as well. But yeah, thank you very much. Stop sharing now so we can go over to any questions.
Thanks, Will. That was really good. Do we actually have any questions for Will? I think there's so much information to take in. Yeah, it was really good.
I'll just write.
Amanda, Victor has asked, is the webinar available, just so we can go back and revisit?
Yes, I'll send it out in the next couple of days. I'll get it all together and we'll send it out. And then once we've got that PDF to me with those resources, I'll send it all out together so you can rewatch it.
Amanda, I see you've put one in there about the minimum of 30 days to qualify for MSA.
Yes.
So yes, if you purchase a feeder or a weaner and you're in a finishing system, you're eligible to be MSA. Those cattle are eligible for MSA grading if kept on farm for 30 days, a minimum of 30 days. And obviously we had that recommendation about the rising plane of nutrition to ensure that they're finished for that processing and that consignment.
Perfect. Thanks, Will.
I nearly applauded Will when you were talking about breeding objectives, because that's something that I'm going on about constantly, and how important it is to understand the market that you are going for. Because in what I believe personally is that if you have that market right, everything else will flow. The business profitability will flow, the grazing, the management will flow, because you need to make money. And if you don't understand where those animals are going and how you use that data. And I think the other thing is we can collect data till we're blue in the face, but the data actually needs to be usable. And understanding how we use that data by setting milestones for animals to get to along their journey from birth to when they have their last bad day, when they get their head cut off. But it's so important to understand that.
Definitely. Oh, Amanda, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry.
If she
See my
is.
mouth moving. Sorry, we've got a couple more questions there. One from Lewis. Will, you might answer that, and then we've got a black box question for Matt after that.
Can you read them out? Because
yeah, I can.
It's not loading for me.
No, that's okay. Lewis has asked, is there an MSA index within breed plan EBV to make better bull selections to achieve better MSA?
So I obviously briefly touched on like an IMF genetics, EBV, and then also like the 400-day weight. So they're currently the traits that influence quality, and the genetic indicators for those traits are currently what's available. But we are actually going through a project at the moment looking at a specific, I guess, quality-based EBV. So yeah, it's in the pipeline. It's looking at the consumer experience, which obviously everything that comes into the MSA index is based on the consumer experience. But that EBV will give you a direct line of genetics to the consumer outcome, taking into account that those traits as a whole. So not quite yet, but yeah, that's in the pipeline that we're working towards, because it's definitely be a great trait to have.
Well, I think the thing is with EBVs is that the technology is moving that quickly as well. So in the breed that we breed, there's actually a feed efficiency test now that we can put our cattle through. But yeah, I agree, Will. I just think that there's so many tools available. But also even evaluating that feedback that you get back. And, it's always linked to the nils tag. So and I know it's a pain in the neck, but if you actually had a list of the nils tags, you can put it back to individual animals that you've sent. I just love this stuff, because I just think that the more information that you have on your animals, the more able you are to pitch them to buyers, but to actually understand where the herd is going and how you can tweak things to improve it.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, just on the buyer side and even on the agent side of things, we're also working in doing similar type of education with the buyers as more at a processor level based on what the processor wants to engage with us on. But each year we work with the RMA group and do some training with some of their young agents coming through as well, because that's a key part for them to help understand, to then help know what actually makes a good animal on farm, and really enhance the knowledge of the industry overall. It's important.
Oh, absolutely.
I've got a couple more questions coming in.
Yes.
So
sorry,
guys.
Yeah, sorry, Will. We could be chatting
outside.
Constantly.
Now, Terry has a question. So Terry, can you unmute yourself and talk?
You might have to unmute him, Amanda, because you're the boss.
He should be able to do that. I can disable him, but he should be able to unmute himself. All right. Well, Terry's working on that, or if he types it, we might move on to the next question, but we haven't forgot you, Terry. Timmy has asked, is there a resource to see MSA benchmarking taking into account breed at a local level to understand market requirements, demand, or is this information only for the user?
So there's going to be a national benchmarking, so that the information, the MSA at a glance I had right at the start, we do every 2 years. We were doing a beef eating quality insights book, which is all the data from the last 2 years. We're now actually developing, and it's soon to be ready and released, developing a national benchmarking platform, which takes all that data on a more regular basis available, which I didn't actually link the beef eating quality insights, but that goes down to a state level and then a regional level from a producer point of view, and that can cover across all your sort of key traits. You can filter for things like grain-fed, grass-fed, HGP, treated, untreated. The breed side of things, MSA is breed agnostic, I guess, really. So obviously we do measure tropical breed content, but that's more of the amount of that breed content as opposed to a Brahman versus a Santa. Where same comes into then things like Herefords or Angus, because it's the traits that are expressed during grading that we measure that have an influence on quality, and those traits are influenced by the genetics of that animal, but not one animal or not one breed or another has a better influence on those traits than another. So we don't actually have a breed specific indicator in there. But that data in terms of national benchmarking and state and region will be available soon for producers that, for MSA producers to have access to, again, through MyMLA.
I think the thing as well, Will, is that when you're sending cattle to the abattoirs, I always, because like the majority of our animals go straight to the feedlot, but there's cows and bullocks and stuff that do go to the feedlot. I go to them straight to the abattoirs. I always do an MSA score, like a sheet. I thought, what have I got to lose? You know, like
exactly.
I'll give it a crack.
It doesn't cost you much to do that.
Well, I think the thing is, you mentioned that cows could go through MSA, and then some people are saying that's bullshit. You can't send cows through MSA. So can you talk a bit about that? Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, real briefly. So they're eligible because, like, obviously, if you've got an old coal cow, if you've not finished them or not made an attempt to fatten them, like they're probably not going to meet the grade, right? And they've got high ossification because they're a lot older. There's other factors there.
But their intramuscular fat should be better, Will.
If they've got the genetics, they could well be. But we do know that if you do finish them or give them the best opportunity at that sort of latter end, but it doesn't have to be an old cow, right? Like you definitely a number of young cows going through that have been through their reproductive cycle and they're now being moved on. And there's a couple of branded beef programs that actually utilize cows because they can see potential, particularly with things like marbling.
Okay, Terry's off mute. So Terry, would you like to ask your question to Matt about black box?
I've just got a question for Matt. Yeah, I've never heard of black box, and obviously that's about live carcass data, and I was just wondering what it's all about. Thanks.
Yeah, hi Terry. Black box is a computer, like it's a computer program.
Right.
And Terry, I'm a lazy brute, so I use black box all the time because
join the club.
I put everything into it. So I weigh cattle very regularly. So it calculates the weights, and then it calculates the predictions of how much weight they're putting on for what, turn off weight you want them to get. Right. So it average from each weigh, it'll average they put on so many kilos per day or what have you. But it also calculates fertility. So it calculates your PTIC, pregnancy testing calf. It calculates, you can actually go down, because I'm a psychopath with all this stuff, it actually tracks down to individual bulls and how their performance is going in the herd. Very, very exciting.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, it just depends what you want out of it, Terry. Yeah.
Yeah. We only we haven't got enough land to finish cattle, so we just grow weaners to roughly 300 to 350 kilos, and then sell them on to backgrounders, and then obviously they go to feedlots from there. But I just hadn't heard about black box, and I was just wondering about it. That's all.
I think the thing, if you can actually make a connection with those sort of people and then get that feedback back. And the biggest thing that, I've been in the cattle game for a long time, and the biggest thing that I've seen is that people don't pitch their cattle as well as they should.
Right.
You know what I mean? You got to sell them.
Yeah.
I guess I'm constantly selling our cattle. I said, I know they can do this. So here's the feedback. Blah 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 blah. They can do 6 push-ups and 10 sit-ups in a minute, all that kind of stuff. Because the more information that you have, the more someone is going to want to buy them.
Very good.
What breed are you doing,
Thanks,
Terry? Just before
we're just straight Angus. Angus at the moment. We've only got a little 800-acre block, and at the moment we've got more than enough cattle to keep fed, but being a bit dry as well at the moment. But no, it's all going well. But no, the livestock data link was really helpful, and I didn't realise my feedback was a thing. So I'll be looking into that once we get off this webinar.
It's the next iteration of the livestock data link, Terry. So you'll be able to access the similar information you had before.
Terrific. Thank you, guys. Great
Thank you.
info. Thank you.
Will, I've got one more
Right.
question so far. So I just checked out my feedback and we only have one animal listed via JBS there. Should be many more. It was an animal injury in 24. So who would they, Angus, contact in relation to that?
Yeah, so we've basically, because I said it's new program coming through, there is a lot of data that we're slowly sort of moving into the system. So it could be as simple as just for whatever reason, and actually something's happened and hasn't moved it through. But yeah, we can sort of look that up if you want to share my details. I didn't actually have them on the slides, but
That
yeah,
was very
Angus, if you wanna-
convenient, Will.
yeah. It's anyway. It depending on where it was consigned. So you said JBS, but obviously they have multiple sites. There's some data may be more available than others, just based on their system pushing it and our system pushing it as we go through the next development process behind it. But yeah, feel free to share my details and Angus get in contact directly and we can have a look in more detail.
Amanda already has, Will. You'll be inundated with phone calls.
I've just put your office number there, Will, just for people to contact you in business hours as well.
Cool. Thanks.
Beautiful.
Well done.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? But as I said, it's very informative. It is very overwhelming. So any feedback would be fantastic. If there's anything else that you would really like to understand, if there's a little process of it. I did say about the grids as well, because that's another part, that is another breakdown, isn't it, Will? And that's something else I learned while I was in my training last year. So I could probably do this. However, Will is the expert and I like throwing things to Will. But if there's any other webinars, and I can see Victor has put in there, is there going to be another webinar? If you've got any suggestions, please let us know, and we're more than happy to team up with the team at MLA and host some more webinars for you guys.
Oh, and I think the other thing is that Amanda and I are doing a lot of work working with producers to concentrate on the markets and where they're actually going with their animals. So if you're interested in that service, feel free to get in contact with Amanda. And she'll tell me.
And I will, I'll send out the email, so all my contact details will be in the email as well. And yeah, fantastic. But if there's no other questions, we might call it a night. We'll just give it a couple of seconds, just make sure nothing comes through. But thank you so much, Will. You've done a great job.
That was brilliant. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's always good to
It was
chat.
so good. I could talk to you for hours.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
You've got his number now. You've got his number.
Yeah, I've got your number now.
Oh.
Perfect.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
See you
Good
soon.
Thank
night.
you. Bye. Bye.